一刷根39大林邦呀，藤蔓当当啊巴扎呀扎呀。
Yeah, so we're going to focus mostly on water, but just really how it's all connected, right? So not just about rainwater harvesting, but also how it's connected to everything, right? Our whole life, everything. Everything relies on water, okay? My name's Jeremiah Kidd. I'm based in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I work a lot in Africa as well. In Santa Fe I have, and Jamaica. Nicole is gonna be mad at me if I don't say that. So this is my company, San Isidro Permaculture. Whoops, I'm in the way here. So San Isidro, we're in a Spanish-speaking part of the United States. San Isidro is the patron saint of farmers and gardeners, right? And so my last name's Kidd, so I thought Kidd Permaculture probably wasn't the best name for the company, right? So we've been working there since 1995, and again going back to even kind of right livelihoods, like we were talking about at the conference a little bit too. Is just I want to encourage all of you to think about what you love in permaculture, and then how can you create a livelihood out of that, right? Whether it's teaching, whether it's a sewing cooperative, whether it's in finance, there's everything, permaculture encompasses everything in life, right? So in all aspects, so whatever your passion is, please find that. And when I dropped out of college to study permaculture and go on work on farms and volunteer, and my parents were like, oh no, right? And that was like in 1990, right? And I've worked in this field ever since, basically. And so I want to encourage you, you can do it. There's lots of opportunities. I've seen people just take off, in consulting or farming or different aspects, water harvesting, whatever your interests are. Okay? So water is so important, right? We need it for everything. We need it before anything. You can't have living soils if you don't have water, right? We can't survive more than 3 or 4 days without water, right? And in the future, right, we're going to have areas that are going to be more dry and areas that are going to be more wet, maybe, right? We don't really know. It's like global weirding. We're on average getting warmer, but we don't know. Some places are going to get drier, some places are going to get wetter, or we get all of our rain in 3 different events in 1 year, right? So we can't really control the climate, right? But what can we control, right? And what's one of the bases of permaculture is design, right? So how can we design more moisture into our systems, right? Is this a good example of a design to moisturize our cities and lives, right? Probably not, right? Most of engineering in the last 100 years has been to pave the soil and move the water away, right? So in history too, so this was the kind of early history, like where I live, they overgrazed, they cut a lot of trees, they overgrazed the land, and then the land couldn't really support grass, right? That pulls the moisture down into the soil. And then we've also had a lot of forest fires. So what happens when you overgraze the land and then you have a fire, right? The water just, when it rains, it just hits and it starts sliding off. Nothing can soak in, right? So how can we reverse this process? This is from where I live in New Mexico, where it's a very arid area, climate. And so much of my work revolves around water, right? Even though it's a permaculture company, many people, they'll come to you to help you solve problems, right? And where I live, water is the limiting factor in the design, right? So it's like everyone needs help with water, irrigation systems, gray water systems, rainwater harvesting, and then in broad scale systems like this, right? So this is what happens. You get overgrazed. The land can't support grasses or ground covers. And then when the rains come, we get rains in really strong, fast rain events. And we start this erosion process, right? It starts starting these gullies here, and then they just dig deeper and deeper and deeper each rainy season, right? So what happens is then the water table starts dropping, right? So instead of the water being up and spreading to the different plants, it's going to these gullies, and then they're digging deeper and deeper, and then the water's not infiltrating, and so the plants up on the side are getting drier and drier. So then the trees start dying, and then these gullies become larger, right? Because the trees and the plants their roots are what's holding the soil, right? So here's like some of the rivers where I live, right? So this is a river, right? This is the Santa Fe River. So what have we done to the river, right? We've channelized it, we've concreted it. So how can we do something different, right? This is a missed opportunity, right? We have all of these hard surfaces, and everyone, when you go to the parking lot and you drive in, everyone's looking for some shade and looking for the shady place to park, right? And then what they have this tree up above where the water is, right? And then one tree for every 100 meters, right? So it's all just about design, right? Because how do we design a more moist and wet society, right? A city, a sponge. How do we design that sponge? So this is what we've been doing, right? So this is courtesy of Brad Lancaster, where we design all the water to run off and away from the house, right? Away from the sidewalks, onto the street, where they're picking up sediment, they're picking up oils, and taking all of that to the river, right? So how can we design abundance, right? How can we design water into our system, right? Thinking about all of the different ways that we can, all of our different, in this little city lot, what's our watershed, right? Our watershed is this little lot, and then maybe the roof of the house, maybe the neighbor's land, you're getting water from the neighbor, possibly here. So thinking about all of those different sources of water, and how can we infiltrate that water into the soil, right? Because you can't have living soil if you don't have water. You can't have plants if you don't have water and living soil, right? And you can't have ground cover and mulch if you don't have plants, right? And so they're trees, right? So it all starts just with water, right? So there's different ways. We talk about different strategies that we can design into the system, right? So there's the active harvesting. So that's like into tanks or cisterns. Passive harvesting, which is kind of what you saw earlier with yesterday with Dr. Pohl, right? And more passive harvesting. And then really, like, how do we keep that water in the soil, right? How can we, as long as possible, right? And this water, and that's through living soils, right? Starting that process, having the water in the soil so that the microbes and the worms and everything can do the process, and start that cycle of one thing's waste can be another thing's food, right? But they can't do that without water, right? Then, whatever water is in your system, how can we reuse that several times, right? It's another permaculture principle, right? And then using that water to create productive polycultures, right? Around our house, or whether it's a farm or anything, right? But you can't do any of that if you don't start by collecting and infiltrating the water, right? And then trying to keep that water in the system as long as possible. So there's a lot of different types of tanks out there. I won't spend too much time on that, but there's poly tanks, metal tanks, above ground tanks. These are below ground tanks. So this is like a system that we put in. This is like 25,000 gallon underground system. This client, their well went completely dry, right? So then they're supplying all of their water for their farm, their animals, and their family just through rainwater harvesting. And where I live, we only get about 20 centimeters per year, 200 mils per year, and so this system will do that for them. So this is like, what's 25,000 gallons, like close to, what, 85,000 liters, something like that, 90,000 liters. Here's another project. This is a rainwater harvesting tank off of a school in Uganda. And so this is a 90,000 liter tank. And so this is called ferro cement. So it's another way to design. You can build buildings with it. You can build water tanks. You can build boats, all kinds of things with ferro cement. So it's ferrous means metal, and then and cement, right? So it's usually chicken wire or some type of wire, and then you're plastering with cement. Okay. Here's another project. So I work a lot with these water projects around the world. This is in Zimbabwe, so this is kind of showing you the process of building a rainwater harvesting ferro cement tank. This is the foundation. And then this is kind of building the walls up. And this cement is maybe about 3 centimeters thick, the walls. This was in 2018, I think, something like that. This is a really great NGO called Soft Foot Alliance. If you ever go to Zimbabwe, they work mostly they started, the husband was a veterinarian and the wife was really into permaculture, right? And so they are living in a national park, and they work mostly with, the problem is, okay, in the dry season, the elephants would come in and smash all the gardens, right? Because they're smelling the water. So they in the dry season, they'll strip the bark off of trees. They'll find any type of water that they can get, right? And so obviously, if you have vegetables, they're gonna want to come eat them, right? Because that's the water, right? Or bananas or anything. So they work with animal-human conflict reduction, right? And so through permaculture and a lot of other projects. So they have beekeeping. So that's one good way to keep elephants out of your gardens is with bees, right? Because elephants are afraid of bees, believe it or not, right? And so that's what they've learned is they can hang these beehives around their gardens, and they could get wax and honey and propolis and all of these things, and actually inhibit or reduce the amount of predation and problems with elephants, right? Or some people didn't want to keep bees, and so even solar-powered speakers that have a beehive helps to keep them away too. So they also have a sewing cooperative, and so we started going around the village and making these water tanks. And this is using a form with just a piece of fabric. So the women would sew a bag of whatever shaped water tank that they want, and then we would use that. We would fill it with sand, buckets of sand, and then that's a form for the wire mesh, right? Because it's not big enough like the other tank where you could get inside and plaster it, right? So this is like you put mud over it so the cement doesn't stick to the fabric. And then you put the wire over it, and then you start plastering. Whoops, I got these out of sequence here. So this is how you kind of rough plaster it, and then finish it, and then this will be capturing the water off of this household here, right?
What happens to the sand that was taken?
So then afterwards, right, so you let it dry, and then you go in and you start removing the buckets of sand, right? And then you can actually get the fabric, the form out of it as well. So you slowly, it's still work, it's a lot of work, but so there's many different ways that you can kind of build these tanks, right? There's also a lot of, so we do a lot in New Mexico. The labor is more expensive, right? And so then it's usually cost prohibitive to have to do tanks that are so labor intensive. So we do a lot of polyethylene tanks, and then this is capturing water off of where you park cars, and then that goes to supporting these polyculture edible landscaping. So this is all fruit trees and a greenhouse in the back. This is for a client here in Santa Fe. And that area infiltrates about 150,000 gallons on average a year, off of 2 or 3 different structures. So this is all See, to permies, they know what this is, right? But to a lot of people, this just looks like a forest, like, or something that's unkept. But then you look at every little thing, comfrey, everything has its purpose, and everything is food producing or medicine producing in the photo, right? We're doing something, right? We always want to have a function where it's pollinators or whatever. So then passive. So passive is more like, how can we hold the water in the soil, right? This is our biggest tank in the world, right? Is underneath our feet, right? And so how can we keep the water in the soil as long as possible? And plants help us do that. They use the water, but then they're cycling it, right? So they bring it back up to the air and create humidity and transfer, right? This is actually. Where's Nicola? Oh yes, this is at Nicola's farm in Jamaica. So this is doing a PDC. This is a hugelkultur swale bed. So we do these, like in Jamaica, there's one tree that's called burn plum, right? And so the sap will burn your skin like acid, right? So the problem is no one touches it. But then the problem is they harvest all the other wood for charcoal or different things, and then there's more and more and more burn plum, right? So we're like, what are we going to do with this stuff, right? And how can we introduce more of the other trees and thin out some of the burn plum? And so we've been doing a lot of hugelkultur beds with that. So using that carbon in the soil to hold the moisture, and composting that into the soil and reducing the amount of this somewhat invasive tree, right? So this is kind of a mulched hugelkultur bed ready for planting with a coconut core on the side. And then we've done these here's another little hugelkultur design in New Mexico that we did these other hugelkultur beds. So again, it's a term of basically, I think it's German, right? Hugel means wood in German, I think. Right. So basically, like when you don't have a chipper, so usually we like to grind things down that's wood so that it has more surface area so it can break down faster, right? Then maybe you don't have a chipper or you have some large logs and you want to be able to like have your beds really hold a lot of water. You can put those logs into the raised beds, and then over time they slowly break down in the soil. And in the meantime, they're holding lots of water. The trick with them is you need to make sure you have enough nitrogen in the soil. Because that's the thing, like if you start a new bed, you don't want to dig your wood chips into the bed, right? Because that wood, you've learned probably in your PDC, to make compost, right, you need to have nitrogen and carbon, right? And so if you have too much carbon, it's going to be trying to find nitrogen to break down. So it's going to pull all the nitrogen out of your soil if you mix the chips in. So if you have wood mulch, you want to always just put it on top. So don't mix it into the soil unless it's already been composted, right? So we have lots of erosion problems in those gullies. You saw the gullies at the start of the presentation? So how do we heal these gullies, right? The water just keeps cutting deeper, deeper, deeper. Then the water table starts dropping. So how do we lift that water in the soil, right? So that's what we're usually trying to do is raise the water level in the drainage, whether it's a river or just a gully. Anytime, typically we're trying to raise that water. If we can lift it up high enough, then the plants and the trees can start accessing that water again. And then we get the riparian areas start to heal themselves, right? If we can lift that water higher in them. So this is one way. If you don't have rocks, you can make brush check dams, right? So like this is on my property. So we have lots of these gullies where I live. So just pruning trees and then building them, tying them together and building them, putting them across the drainages can help. And you can see how this is ponding up several thousand liters of water just right there. Then the next step is, okay, you planted the water. Now, then you can start to introduce the plants, some seeds, some ground cover, native shrubs, planting along the edges, right? Because they wouldn't survive if there wasn't the water there to start, right? All right, here's some another showing, these are other brush dams you can't see, but they're creating these ponds, right? So there's a brush dam here, there's one here, there's one here. This is all in the drainage right next to my house. Another way is gabions, right? So that's those, you see them on the side of the roads. They're wire baskets, rock-filled wire baskets, basically. Right? Often they're used for retention, but we use them a lot for, again, doing these check dams. We're checking the water, and as the water slows down, it loses its strength and velocity to carry the sediment, right? So then the sediment drops behind the gabion, and it raises the floor of the gully, right? So you can keep building these up, and you can raise this water level up in the gully, and then start planting that. So these are kind of like a plaster, right? Or like a Band-Aid, just to help to start to heal the soil, right? Even though these last many years, this isn't the end game. This is not doing the work, right? In the long term, it's really the roots and the plants are going to be doing the work, right? The tree roots. These are just kind of like putting your arm in a plaster cast or putting a Band-Aid or just helping to heal the system, right? So here's how you can build these into drainages, create these ponding areas, and infiltrate hundreds of thousands of liters of water, right? Like this one on average is about 2.5 million liters a year in this area, this drainage. So we're capturing water off of a drainage, but also off the parking lot and several office complexes here. So this is all work so we work a lot with the government. So this is all paid for by the US government and the city government kind of teaming up on a grant to slow the water and re-wet our city, right? So some other ways to catch water, wherever water's falling, right, off the houses. If you have gutters and downspouts, this is different ways. We have canales, they're called, so like a scupper kind of, where we put the water into one scupper that kind of falls off. So we usually put this catch box underneath, and that can be either piped to a rainwater tank or to a passive area with pumice wick, something like that. And then you just top it with pond liner, and so it can end up, so it looks like this, right, when it's finished. Right? So other ways, other just examples, this is what we call like a pumice wick, or this is actually a scoria, so it's a volcanic rock that's porous, right? So you're trying to create a space underground that has lots of pores or openings and places for the water to soak into the soil, right? So we don't want the water soaking in right next to the house, but we want to take it out right out here where we're going to plant a hedge, right? So this is a solid pipe going to a perforated pipe. And this is where the water is draining in, and then we can support plants here, right? So planting that water before we plant our plants. So swales, you guys probably know a lot about swales from the PDC, I would imagine. So these series of berms and trenches on contour, right? And so where I live, the soil is very sandy, and also we have a lot of slope, and so swales for us don't work as well as other places where there's more clay in the soil and where it's a little flatter, right? So here's some different projects in Africa. This is in KwaZulu-Natal, digging swales. This is in Tanzania on a project. This is a really great NGO called Global Resources Alliance in Tanzania. So this is, they get these big rains, right? So their swales are you could take a boat down this swale, right? It's 3 meters wide and so different examples. Again, with swales, these are just in construction, you always want to have a rock line spillway. So you always want to design where you want the water to go, right? We want to soak it in, but you always have to think about your overflow, whether it's a cistern, whether it's a swale, whether it's a ponding area. At some point, it's gonna fill up and overflow. So you don't want to cause another problem, right? So these are those rock line spillways. These are just some other examples of swales. Another important thing with swales is you always want to have a ground cover on them, right? So you always want to keep, obviously with permaculture, we always just want to cover the ground, whether it's with mulch or plants or whatever, but especially with swales, right? Because if they're exposed to the sun, then it's easy for the soil to erode and wash away when there's a large rain. So here's a nice swale, and it's all planted out with polyculture. multi-use trees, mulberries, peaches. This is all in an area that, again, we get around 200 mils a year. And this is a kind of a cooperative garden area, right? So there's a lot more of these like communities where instead of everyone having their house separate and then having like the same amount of green space around each like house and having their neighbors be far away, like let's cluster our houses, and then out of 3 acres or 2 hectares of land, then we have 1.5 hectares of open space that's all like equal or like shared between the people, and then the houses are a little clustered more together, right? So this like garden basically but provides some produce and fruit to 5 different households, and then they have a shared like wastewater system, so constructed wetlands that filters the water with plants. Here's like another example of kind of like swales right as they're being dug. This is like the first rain where they kind of fill up. This is for another client. So again, we're planting the water, right? And then the fun part happens, right? Then you get to sow the seeds, then you get to plant the plants and get the whole train going, right? And get the system going with our polycultures, right? So here's after it's kind of like after a couple months after it's starting to green up. This is another project. It's also called Tanzanian Children's Fund. Really amazing project. So I work with another group called EARN. So it's East Africa Regenerative Network, right? So we run a PDC twice a year, usually in Tanzania. And then there's a foundation that gives each NGO that's picked $5,000 a year for 5 years. So $25,000 spread out over 5 years to start a permaculture farm, agroforestry farm. Okay, so the PDC comes, maybe there's 30 attendees, so it's 2 people from each NGO, so maybe 15 NGOs. So if you're chosen, then 2 people from that NGO get chosen, they go take the PDC, then they get their first allotment. They have to make a budget and a farm plan. Then they take they go home and they try to implement their design that they did at the PDC. And then they'll have me or I work a lot with Mark Shepard, who's either Mark Shepard or EJ. There's a few of us. Then we'll be sent back to the farm in a 3 to 6 month period and to go and help them lay things out or see what's working, what's not working, problem solve with them. So this is a really great organization where it's not like a typical orphanage, right? So if they take a child, they have a child that is brought to them by first they try to foster, the government tries to foster the kids or find relatives, right? And then if they can't, then sometimes they'll come to the Rift Valley Children's Village and ask them, like, do you have the funds to take them on? And they basically adopt. So it's not like an orphanage. Once they take the child, it's their kid. It's the organization. So it's like a village of children that are all brothers and sisters. And they put them through high school, they put them through college, and now a lot of them are coming back to teach, be teachers, and start little businesses in the community. So it's a pretty amazing program. So this was going, so they came to our PDC, and then we went back. This was showing you a little bit of their farm visit, where they were donated land between, so they're adjacent to a school that's about 3,000 children. And so then their next project was to build this farm that they could have a lunch program, breakfast and lunch program for the children. So be feeding 2,000 children every day, breakfast and lunch, right? And then that helps get children to school too, because if they don't have enough food at home, then they want to go to school because they're hungry, right? And so to have some good, clean food for them, right? So they had some good things started already, but we came and we worked on this whole new piece of land between the I don't want to call it orphanage, the children's village and the school. So this is in October, 2 years ago. In our first swales. Then this is, so 2 months later, the rains haven't come yet. So this is like showing all of the swales that were dug, right? So this is the school, and then the children's village is on this side, right? And it goes down to the drainage. This is a river here. So can you tell which, by the contour lines, can you tell where are the hills and where are the valleys? Right? Right, so here, yeah, you can tell this is going downhill, right? Because you got the swales going this way. And then this, you can kind of tell that this is a ridge, right? Because the lines are going out. This is what's kind of confusing though, right? So there's actually a basin. It's kind of a funny, so there's an adjacent football pitch here, so we're getting water off the football pitch. We're getting water from buildings here. So this is actually a little basin, right? For some reason, there must have been an old fence line or something. They planted trees in a row. So how can we capture that water and then spread it out as far as we can, you know, as evenly as we can, instead of having a super wet spot and then dry areas, right? So this is December. Then they planted, they got the rains. This is next April, after the next April. So this is, rains came like the end, right at the start of the year. So this is about three and a half months in, something like that. And then in 2 more months. So this is just by designing. So again, the same thing that Andrew's been talking about and Dr. Pohl's been talking about is just designing water into our system, right? This is without any irrigation. This is just from rains. Okay. And about 6 months after planting, something like that. And so these are rows of trees. So we plant on the swales. We plant rows of trees, kind of almost like Jude's talk about, like the hedgerows almost, right? So like the trees, and then an understory, smaller trees and shrubs. Those are along the swales. Then in between the swales would be your annual cropping, right? So your maize, your millets, your grains, vegetables, things like that. Okay. So some other strategies. So I was saying we have very erosive soils, and so we do a lot of what we call one rock dams. And it's basically just putting bands of rock on contour to help slow that water down. And then seeding them. That's very important, to put some native grasses and wildflowers and seeding these. Because the rocks act like a good mulch, right? I think rocks and gravel have a bad reputation. It's like, oh, they're going to heat everything up and it's going to be terrible and going to turn to desert. But in my experience, where I live in an arid climate, rock mulch is really great, right? And so imagine like a rock like this. If you're an ant, that would be a huge water harvesting structure that you're walking next to, right? And so then all that water sheds off the rock, and then it's covered and mulched underneath and kept moist underneath the rock, right? And then it provides all of these perfect little nursery places for grasses and wildflowers to grow between them, right? So then you'll get these bands of even thicker, stronger rooted plants that help slow the water, filter the water, infiltrate the water, okay, without having to dig. So it's really, what do you have in the landscape? Do you have lots of rocks? Maybe you don't have rocks, maybe you have lots of branches or trees or opportunities to make brush dams, right? You could even do brush dams on contour as well. We've done that. So then this is kind of what they start to look like after the starts growing. See how much thicker it is where the rocks are compared to the adjacent land, right? Okay. So thinking also about just multiple, again, with permaculture, it's not just about the take, right? Or the one element, but how does that element perform many functions, right? And how does those different elements support each other and act synchronistically with each other, right? So maybe if I have a water tank on the house, then where is that overflow going to go, right? Depends what your design is, right? What are you trying to accomplish next, right? So this is like in a house before my new house currently. This is an older house. We had the area was pretty tight, city lots. We didn't have enough space for a large tank that would hold all of our water needs, right? And so But then the kids really wanted a pond too, right? So to have the tank overflow, it's going to overflow quite a bit because it's undersized. Then it's going to overflow into the pond, and that's going to have edible plants and fish and different things growing, right? And then the pond overflows into our most water-loving plants, right? So our bamboos, our arrowroots, like things that like the most water, right? So making sure that you're making good use of the overflow and having those different elements connected, right? So we're providing food here, we're providing habitat, we're providing edible flowers, so many different benefits by just the overflow of that tank, right? Also always thinking about where can we get, so here's another, it's hard to see, this is a basin that's supporting raspberries and pears and apples and many different crops here. Overflow of a tank that goes to a ponding area. Also thinking about any of your hardscape structures, your hard surfaces, right? So not just your roof, but how about your patios, your paths, your parking areas, okay? All of those spaces, how can we incorporate those into the design, right? So this is a pathway, and then this path goes and drains into this basin that has fruit trees in it. Often, in wetter areas, often they'll have a raised beds, right? Because we need drainage, maybe, and some plants don't want to be wet all the time, right? Where I live in arid climates, we want to have recessed beds, right? We want all of the hard surfaces to be higher and the water to be able to flow to where the plants are, right? So that's all a part of just that designing our system, right? What kind of climate am I in? What type of plants do I want? Maybe I want some plants that are really wet, so they're going to be in the rain gardens, and then other plants that need more drainage, they're going to be in the raised areas, right? So just thinking about all of those, creating those little microclimates along the way, right? So this is at the children's, this is the botanical garden, and in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And so you can create these rain gardens and water harvesting structures to be really beautiful, right? Be part of the landscape, right? So again, I want to, we're supposed to have all of these different functions in our system, and I want to encourage everyone to also know that I think beauty is very important. And I think sometimes that gets overlooked in permaculture. We always want to think about like function, but it also needs to be beautiful, right? How are we going to convince the world to do this if it looks like a mess, right? And there's straw bales everywhere, and there's piles of stuff everywhere, right? So it's like we can have it be functional and beautiful. So I would encourage or push people toward that, right? So rain gardens, I mentioned that a little bit. So this is becoming a big strategy for cities, right? Is separating the rainwater from the sewage water, right? So then when we have these big rain events, we're not overflowing the sewage treatment plants and dumping sewage into the rivers, right? So that was kind of the instigation for it, and now it's becoming a really wide scale, at least in the United States, I think in Europe, and I think hopefully spreading wider throughout the world. But really separating, if we can separate and infiltrate the rainwater in thousands of small rain gardens, then we're going to have less flooding, we're going to have more trees, we're going to have more shade, we're going to be producing more oxygen, sequestering more carbon, right? So that's a win-win, right? So that's taking what the problem, and the problem is the solution, right? So the problem is, too much water. Okay, well, how can we make that a benefit, right? These are some different examples of rain gardens. Some in Santa Fe, like these that we've made. Some on parking lots. So you can retrofit the parking lots by doing these curb cuts. This is in Arizona. This is in Oregon, Portland. And then you just have to educate the public to not drive into your rain gardens. Right? As I was walking by, I was like, wow, that was something. They needed a tree there, I think, instead or something. But, so other examples, right? So rain gardens, and they can also be a really good, think about where is that water coming from? If it's coming off of a parking lot, it might have a lot of oils, things from the petrol pesticides, different kind of chemicals, right? So then there's a whole science behind that called phytoremediation, right? But what can we plant into these rain gardens that are going to help filter and clean the water, right? So this is one off of a library we did in Santa Fe, right? And then these grasses, these are alkali secatone grass, and it's really good. It has deep roots that go down twice as high as they are here. So maybe they're 1.5 meters high here, so that means that we got 3 meters of roots going down, right? And all those roots are sloughing off and dying and sequestering carbon, right? And cleaning the water as they do that. Here's another one. This is in the island of a parking lot. So normally they would just be some rocks or boulders or something, right? So why not we make this a water harvesting structure for this whole office complex, right? So here's after it's kind of planted out. And then now I should take a new picture of this because now it's a little jungle, right? And we've even started, I'm not an expert in phytoremediation at all, but my friend Reese Baker, he took this picture and that's what he's studying his PhD on. So he's going to be writing lots of material about that, and he's doing a lot of research with mycology as well. So taking like what we call like weed trees. So we have these Siberian elms, so elm trees that came from Siberia and China that have kind of taken over the native trees in New Mexico. And so we have a lot of usually extra logs of that. It's not a great firewood, and so we've been planting them into these rain gardens and then inoculating them with different mushrooms, and then testing the water as it comes in, and then testing the water as it comes out, right? The overflow, and getting some good results. So here's some just different. So here's another opportunity where it's like, okay, all this water was running down to this arroyo here, this drainage, causing lots of erosion. So how can we just divert this water into the landscape, plant it out, and soak that water into the soil, right? So this is kind of another example of that. And this is with it kind of planted out. So here is, at least for my climate, these are really good phytoremediation plants, right? That have different do different functions, right? Pull out different things. Some work better with hydrocarbons. Some, it's harder with like the periodic chart, right? So the periodic chart, all of those things are at the base elements, right? They can't be broken down more. So those are the ones that are difficult, right? Lead, mercury, things like cadmium, right? But then hydrocarbons and other things are really a bunch of different elements stuck together, right? To create plastic or create gasoline, petrol, diesel, different things like that. And so some of these plants can actually break those pieces, and then they're not as dangerous, right? Because then it's just carbon. I'm not a scientist in this way at all, but anyway, the hydrocarbons are easier to break apart and to clean up than the base elements, right? And so then you look and see, for each different climate, there's going to be different plants that are native and hardy and can survive being inundated with water for short periods of time. Okay? So then, this is the fun part, right? Living soils. You can't have water, or you can't have plants if you don't have living soils. Okay, so even one thing too, we talked about is working with, I'm trying to remember who was talking about this, to infiltrate your local government. I heard that recently, at the conference maybe or something. So that's what we really tried to do in Santa Fe, right? It's like, okay, how can we, I don't want to be a politician, but then how can I influence the politicians? How can I get into either permaculture things into the codes or into our local municipalities, the people that are making decisions, right? And so what we started was we'd have these permaculture potlucks, and then we'd start inviting our local representatives, right? And so slowly over time, some of them were really interested and took PDCs. And we had one of our city planners, main city planners, had a permaculture design certificate. And so now in Santa Fe, if you have an open space, they've even written it into the code that you have to have a permaculture designer on the planning team for any new park or open space, right? The landscape architects didn't like that too much, so you can make, a really big, have a big impact and change, right? So this is a city park that we worked on with lots of different water harvesting features and rain gardens. That's a tunnel, so creating a bike path under our main highway that's going through town, right? So a new tunnel under here that connected this bike path. And so just thinking like on, also like on a bigger scale, right? All these permeable pavers and rain gardens and things like that. So we can all make a difference, right? Here's our biggest tank, right? Here's our biggest water holding structure that we have is the soil underneath our feet, right? So besides it just holding water, then like we talked about, that water is then starting the process of being able to have living soils, right? To have mycology, to have mycorrhizal, to have all of these different microbes that are, it's a whole like economy. Everything's down there giving and taking, and here, let me barter you with this, let me give you some, you give me some carbohydrates, I give you some minerals. It's a whole little world going on, right? But none of that can happen without water, right? So getting that water into the soil and then starting our living soil process through composting, right? We're applying effective microorganisms, there's lots of different ways to kind of jumpstart your living soil, right? So this is interesting. So if we can increase the soil organic matter by 1% each acre, so it's about a half a hectare, then holds an extra 25,000 gallons, right? So that's about, 90,000 liters per half a hectare. So there'd be 180,000 liters per hectare, something on average, 200,000 liters per hectare. If we could just increase the organic matter in the soil, right? So everyone knows what organic matter is? Right? So by composting, by mulching, having that mulch break down slowly over in the soil, right? By increasing that organic matter in the soil, that's our water holding tool in the soil, right? So that's really what composting and mulching and all of that is doing. Then thinking about, okay, we have this water in our system. Where I live and it's very dry, our only continual perennial river is where? Running under our feet, right? Under our house, right? Through our pipes, right? So really thinking about that, like, okay, how can I make the most use of that water that's in my system? And how can it, remember we're supposed to, like, once it leaves our system, energy that comes into our system, once it leaves our system should be as clean or cleaner than it came into our system, right? That's our goal as permaculture designers, right? So really thinking like, how can I both clean up that soil or clean up that water, and whatever's making that water dirty is nutrient or a food for something, right? So what can I plant or what can I have in the system that's going to use that nutrient to clean that water up, right? And then and have more water for irrigation or a pond or whatever you want to use the water for, right? So usually black water is the toilet and the kitchen sink, and then gray water is all the other water in the household, right? Laundry, showers, sink water, all of that, right? So you can do a really simple system. This is from Oasis Designs. If you're interested in gray water, check out Oasis Design. Art Ludwig in Santa Barbara. He's written books on that. And so just a really simple system, right? It's just like diverting that water to a mulched basin around a plant. And again, most of the trees that we work with that are production trees, they don't want their trunks in the water, right? So you need to build up, they need to have their crowns, their trunks out of the water. And their trunks, that's not where they're pulling. Trees don't take water up at the trunk, right? It's way out in the drip line. That's where where they're pulling the water in, right? The trunk is just, those roots are just to help the tree stand up, right? So you really want to spread that water out as wide as you can, and then obviously then create your guilds, right? So maybe you have an apple tree, and then you have artichokes and comfrey, and your plants, your pollinator plants, and creating that symbiotic guild around each of these areas, right? And the water is just helping to set that stage, right? So that you can create these spaces, these polycultures. So this is a real easy. So these branched drain gray water designs, super easy. Just like calculating how much water. Okay, I take. See, if it's Chris, he takes 1 shower a month, so he would only be able to supply enough water for a small shrub. And then, but then I take a shower every day, right? I'm a water hog. So anyway, no. Sorry, you just make a budget, right? About like how many, I have a client's, okay, how many loads of laundry how many showers do you take? Do you like baths? They use a lot of water. And then you can divide that by how many trees will it support, right? So it'd be like, okay, if it's 600 liters a week of water, and then you need 40 liters a week per each of those oasis trees or fruit trees, then you can divide that up and know how much you're going to break that water line up to supply how many trees, right? So a lot of times we'll even use these, like just the buckets that you get the fruit tree that comes in. So this water, the water line comes out and this gets 100 liters a week of water. You split that with a Y, and then each of those pipes get 50 liters a week. You split that pipe, then each of them get 25 liters a week, right? So then that line can maybe supply water to 4 different trees. So you could do this, or like what I showed in the drawing before, like a mulched basin around. You do usually want to keep the gray water covered. Gray water is, that's another example of infiltrating, right? So we pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and finally got gray water approved and legal. And you don't even need permission from the government to install it. So you don't need to get a permit if it's under a certain amount. So commercial systems, you still need a permit. But for under 250 gallons per day, it's legal to put in your own gray water system, right? But you need to follow guidelines, right? And one of them is usually to keep the water subgrade, so it means below the soil, right? Because you don't want kids trying to drink this or animals drinking this, right? So even though it's pretty clean water, but it just has dirt on our skin and things like that, but still, like the pipes have bacteria. There's things, right? You don't want to drink this water, right? But it's really good it has all of those nutrients, the dirt and all of that is really good fertilizer, right? So different examples of kind of a branch drain systems. So this is one at Brad Lancaster's house, like with his washing machine. So like when my kids were little, we had cloth diapers, right? So we didn't do disposables. So with that, when we'd wash, every few times we'd wash the diapers, you'd have to sterilize it, right? So then you'd take your hose, move it to the sewer, right? Because you don't want to send the bleach to the plants. Then after that, the next one, this pipe goes out to the apple guild. This one goes out to the fig guild. This goes out to the lime tree guild, right? So each time you do a load of laundry, you just move that hose to each different area, right? And then see it can go out to different. So that's one way to do it. This is kind of showing that mulched basin. This is at Brad. If you're interested in rainwater harvesting, Brad Lancaster is really great. His books are really excellent. So these are all courtesy of him, these drawings. So anyway, this is at Brad's house with the figs. And you can also do it super, super simple, right? Like, this is a little project basically you just need to spread that water out and sink it in, right? If it's like, gray water is just a resource, right? Or what they say with most of pollution is just, too many nutrients focused in one area, right? And you need to spread those nutrients out. So often you'll see this where it's like, the gray water from a kitchen just goes out and it's just this murky, stinky puddle outside the kitchen, right? But just spreading that out to actually where there's plants then it becomes a nutrient and becomes a fertilizer and irrigation water, right? So this is just, working with some ladies just using, an empty beer bottle to like create a canal to get that water out to the banana trees, right? So it doesn't have to be a super complicated system. And then there are systems that are more complicated, right? So this is like, this is what I have in my house. So instead of, with the gray water system, right, you need to double plumb the system, right? So you need to have your black water going to the sewer area and then your gray water. So you're gonna have more pipes under the house, right? Which means more plastic. So that's the downside. The upside, or the other option is like, okay, let's send everything to the sewer, but then let's clean up the sewer water, right? So you don't have to double plumb and separate the gray water from the black water from the toilets. Just send everything, because the toilets, as we know here with the humanure, the toilets are full of nutrients, right? That we're just sending and then using chemicals to try to clean them up, right? So how can we use bacteria and organisms to clean up and plants to clean that water up? Use those nutrients to grow food, right? Provide habitat. So this is the system that I have at my house. It's called the sledgehammer. Basically, you're providing lots of surface area for beneficial bacteria, right? So this is like corrugated plastic, and then this is an aerator, right? So this is like those kind of like those hoses that are leaky for irrigating. What do they call those? Soaker hoses, and that goes in the bottom, right? And then you add the bacteria in here. So then you pump oxygen into this, and then the oxygen bubbles up through and feeds that bacteria, right? So you're turning your septic system from anaerobic to aerobic, right? So different bacteria that work in both aerobic or anaerobic systems. So this is like then they're cleaning that water up. So this is toilet water, right? They're cleaning the water up clean enough to then to be used in a drip irrigation system, right? So that's what we have. We install a lot of these systems. What I have at my house, so this is then you're basically pumping your gray water out to your guilds or wherever. I have this system also. Obviously passive or gravity systems are better, right? Because less pumps, less plastic, everything, right? In my situation, the only place for my food forest and everything was kind of uphill of my house. So then this system was like for me better, because I didn't have enough room downhill of my house. I had a drainage below my house. So anyway, we clean the water up, we pump up. So then that's the downside is like, okay, I have a pump, I have more plastic. But it's like, okay, well then I'll like try to run the pump with the solar panels, and and I'm reusing the water. So you just have to, it's just always a balance, right? The more, sometimes you get too complicated. Keep it as simple as you can, but sometimes technology is good. So anyway, this is black water that's been cleaned up and then used to grow food, right? Fruit trees, pollinators.
And do you have it stored, or it just goes straight to the? Do you have a tank up there, or does it just go straight into it?
No, you just kind of want to kind of use it pretty quickly. Yeah, that's one thing with gray water. It's a good point. Is typically with gray water, you want to use it within 24 hours, okay? Because it turns to black water, right? Because it has all those nutrients in there, right? So those nutrients, everything's starting to eat each other. It's starting to turn, then it turns into stinky black water, right? So you want to use it as you produce it, okay? So a lot of people try to put it in tanks, and they're like, oh, this is gross, it smells, and they don't. Just like better, like those branch drain systems, just use it as you produce it. So again, this is what we're headed for, right? This is why we did all of that work in the first place, to plant the water, so that we can have these productive polycultures for whatever climate you're in, right? Whether it's an arid climate or a wet climate. And, both, you guys know all this. I'm preaching to the choir, right? So basically, this is the fun part, right? Is like, then we have these living soils, producing productive plants, that are providing habitat and food and medicine and shade and oxygen, and the list goes on, right? So these are different landscapes that are all all of the water is either rainwater or gray water or black water supported. Okay. It's another one. This is all rainwater, gray water. So even in the mountains, this is at 8,000 feet elevation. So that's what, 2,500 meters, something like that. We have almonds, sunchokes, strawberries, hoop houses for kales and things over the winter. Lots of amaranth and different ground covers as well. This is all just with rainwater and gray water. Again here, raised beds. So with veggies, typically what we'll want to use is rainwater, right? So not the gray water for veggies. So gray water is for shrubs, perennials, trees, but you don't want to spray it, right? Because it has bacteria in it, so you don't want to breathe that bacteria. So it's all subgrade. And so underneath mulch. And for trees and shrubs and perennials, okay? Not for your veggies. So yeah, this is all rainwater gardens in an area that gets 200 mils a year. Right? And this is... So anyway, thank you all very much. And
I have an observation and a question. First thing is the observation. You talked about aesthetics, and one of the things that I've noticed is if you have an element that provides more than one function, it's inherently aesthetically pleasing. Something in our inner being, in our humanity, looks at an element providing two functions is aesthetically pleasing. The second question is, do you use biochar? Because biochar, 1 ton of inoculated biochar has the capacity to hold 30 tons of soil moisture. And anecdotally, we planted in 2014, we planted at 200 of a very rare criollo kind of cacao that we collected deep in the Maya Mountains. So we were using biochar, and I had an actual scientist with me, and he said, dude, you gotta use 20 controls or you're just drinking Kool-Aid. And I was like, okay, I'll do it. And we did it. 2015, we got hit by a very hard dry season. All 20 of the controls died, and all 180 of the trees that had inoculated biochar managed to make it through the dry season. So have you ever worked with biochar for soil moisture retention?
yeah, so I should have put that into the living soils part. So yeah, that's putting that organic matter into the soil, right? So did you talk about biochar in your PDCs and everything before? Yeah, everyone know. Okay, next presentation, perfect. Segue. So getting that carbon in the soil, right? So think of like a piece of wood. This is like, basically it's carbon with a bunch of water and oil in it, right? There's different, and so if you can burn out the water and the oil, then it's gonna be like a big sponge. Okay? It's gonna have all these microscopic holes and everything, and homes for microbes and areas to hold water. So biochar is a really good, effective way to increase the water holding capacity.
Take a picture outside. I'm sorry very much, Maya. Thank you very much. Histoire que